Welcome to the Mitcham History Notes YouTube channel. Today's video concerns the sad destruction of a piece of Britain's railway heritage. The railway I'm referring to is the Surrey Iron Railway, which came into service in 1803. That's over 220 years ago. It ran from Wandsworth through Mitcham, on to Croydon and to Merstham, and from Mitcham Junction there was a spur that went to Hackbridge. So let's get started. About 10 years ago, 2014, the Young's Ram Brewery at Wandsworth was being demolished to make way for a housing development of over 600 flats. During the various stages of this development, numerous parts of the Surrey Iron Railway were discovered. They were put to one side, then buried. And I believe that since they're buried, they're going to just slowly be destroyed. But what do we know about the Surrey Iron Railway? This photograph is a constructed photograph to illustrate what the Surrey Iron Railway looked like. There would have been more than one cart being pulled by the horse. The rails were flanged. This meant that any cart could travel along them, and then when there's a break in the rail, the cart could just carry on the normal ground. And the cart I'm showing in this constructed photograph is laden with coal, which was apparently the most common commodity carried along the railway. So here's the routes: Wandsworth, Somerstown, Garrett Lane, Collier's Wood, through Mitcham Common to Croydon, and a spur, as I said, from Mitcham Junction to Hackbridge, not shown on this map, and from Croydon, Burley, Smitham, down to Merstham. I'm using a constructed photograph to illustrate how the railway was put together. The individual rails were 3 feet long. I think that was deliberate. The engineer designing the system could then just measure the length of all the track required in yards, and the number of yards equates to the number of pieces of track required and each stone. The tracks were mounted on these stone slabs, which was 14 inches square and 9 inches deep, and then a spike driven down between the two pieces of rail into a hole in the top of the block. So, how many pieces of rail and how many stones were there? Given that one rail is 1 yard, and the estimated length of the system was 9 miles, then if we multiply 9 by 1760 yards, we get 15,840 yards. But of course, that's just for one side of the railway, so you actually double that, 31,680. So as a conservative estimate, bearing in mind I'm not taking into account the spur and the brakes and the twists and turns, if there was around 9 miles of this system, there would be around 30,000 pieces of rail and 30,000 stones. So when the Surrey Iron Railway fell out of use in 1843, what happened to these pieces of rail and these stones? Well, the Wonder Industrial Museum at Lower Green West in Mitcham has a collection of 2 rails and 2 stones. And this photograph I took when I visited the museum. I actually took a tape measure along to show that the rail is actually 36 inches, 3 foot, 1 yard. And you'll notice the gaps at each end of the rail. That's where the spike would go down. This pub in Merstham, called the Feathers, has across the road from it a little park. And in that park are some rails from the Surrey Iron Railway mounted on some stones. And there's a display given the history of the line. Unfortunately, the original rails were stolen 10 years ago, and these are replicas. So there's not many rails left in existence, which would kind of make sense because, well, they're metal, so they would be melted down and used for something else. But what happened to the stones? Well, they tend to be used for building. This 1937 Meccano magazine has a photograph of a Croydon Bowling Green tea house, built of the old stone block sleepers. I dare say that doesn't exist anymore, but it was actually the Ram Brewery at Wandsworth that had the largest collection of stones. On public display in this wall that was along Ram Street were these blocks set in the wall, and above it was a plaque which was from the Wandsworth Society, 1994. This plaque was removed prior to the demolition of the brewery, kept in storage for a bit, and it's now been redisplayed on a wall in an access alleyway between Ram Street and the development. Another part of the brewery that had a number of these sleeper stones was the exercise yard. These were stacked 2 high, so 2 courses of them. This is an aerial photograph of the exercise yard, and I measured out the lengths of the two sections of wall. One was 32 feet and the other was 128 feet. So how many stones were here? Well, let's add 32 feet and 128 feet together to get 160 feet. Now I said one stone was 14 inches long because it's 14 inches square, so no matter which way you turn it around it's going to be 14 inches long. So let's divide 160 feet times 12 to give us the number of inches of the total wall length by 14. And that gives us one course of stones is 137. But as I say, it was two courses of stones, so 274. So I estimate there were about 274 stones around the exercise yard. Now the exercise yard was where the sales centre was built for the development of the site. And what happened to the stones? They were buried. They were buried in the euphemistically called the landscaping. Yes, it's landscaping, but they were buried. They're not visible in this photograph, but that's what I was told by the site manager. They were buried. However, when this wall actually got demolished, a lot more stones were found. And they were put in a pile over by the Armory Road entrance to the brewery site. That was the temporary entrance for a period of time to people coming to the various functions that were being held in the site before the demolition started. And there's the pile of stones that were recovered from the wall. And I never found out how many there were. I did ask English Heritage or Historic England, what they're called now. I asked them many times. They said, don't worry, they're listed. Yes, they're listed, but how many of them are there? A new developer took over the remaining phase of the development of the site. They revamped their sales and marketing suite. And that's where these stones ended up. They were buried as well. Although this time you can see them at the surface. This is not very good though, is it? I mean look, you can actually see the holes where the rails were connected. The holes are exposed. Now this means that they will fill with water, and in icy weather the water will expand and break the stones. This is probably happening to the ones that were buried underneath as well. At some point in the future, these stones will be dug up and they will just fall apart. This is terrible. Did any of these stones end up in museums? I don't think so. I went to the National Railway Museum in York about 5 years ago. They didn't even have an exhibition about the Surrey Iron Railway. Do you think they should have? What do you think? Leave a comment or two. If you like the video, press the like button please. Consider subscribing. Get back to more cheerier subjects later. Bye for now.